No, I don't. I think the first time I did Mahler was heard Mahler was when I was conducting it, or maybe just before. I heard Mahler earlier when in the context of Ives, which I was always very interested in because there's this legend that there's this story that Mahler, when he came back from New York, had a score of Ives in his suitcase and wanted to bring him to Europe. And then, unfortunately, he died. So because there are some connections between Ives and Mahler. And I think through Ives I first encountered the music of Mahler. Yes, I would say that. I mean, as a young conductor, you dream of conducting Mahler. So I think the first symphony I conducted was number 5 years later. And then I worked my way through the whole catalog. But well, it's today I think different. Today I think it's frightening a little bit because there's such an enormous amount of information and counterpoint, and it's just amazing. I mean, and you need a long time to understand what is happening. It's a very general question how you approach music. I mean, I think the advantage of Mahler's scores is that he was a conductor himself, so he is really making sure everything is in the score, and I like that. But the question on top of that is how much liberty you have beyond that. I mean, how much did Mahler know about his own music? I mean, because he was a conductor, of course, the conducting is also described in his scores, much more than in others. But the question still remains, how much, where's my space? How do I approach it? And when you listen to these old recordings, you're amazed, how different they are. And nowadays, in the more, when we take the text really very, very, very literally, then sometimes I'm afraid you lose the mystery of it. And sometimes, like in very modern music, all these descriptions and indications and all that it's it hinders you to do that because you're so busy in fulfilling what is asked from you that you only at a very later stage maybe come to the point that you feel free of all these orders. I think the biggest challenge with these big pieces is the organization of time. How to get the architecture right. I think that's always the biggest challenge, and I personally like that very much. I like pieces who last an hour or longer. I like that. I feel because there the conductor really has an enormous responsibility because the economy of a piece has to be really built up, because otherwise it will not last an hour. I mean, the tension will not last. So that's for me always a big challenge. And maybe I learned this with No-No, because I come from Prometeo, and there you have more than 2 hours of music, and the music doesn't really help you because there's no development, there's just a being. I mean, so ever since I did that, I'm interested in time economy, and I think with Mahler, the big symphonies, you need that. I mean, you need a lot of detail and expression and all that, but you need also basically an idea, you know, how the whole piece. I mean, number 3. Take number 3. You have this huge first movement, and then you have this very precious movement number 2 and number 3. And then what I usually do is 4, 5, 6. I do without interruption. And then you have this enormous adagio in the end, which I love to have an adagio in the end. I like all the symphonies to end on a slow note. But basically, I would say that if you say that the song is at the heart of his music, at least in the beginning, first 4 symphonies, then I think it's more, in my understanding, it's more a singing inside, not too much outside. It's a Volkslied, you know, it comes from very simple, honest sentiments carried for centuries, you know. And I very much like this tone in the poems already, and there's also a simplicity about it. And I think Mahler was criticized a lot of kind of using very simple tunes, but that is what I like, you know. I mean, there again you have this context with Ives, who used very simple tunes in his music, structurally very complex, but the tunes were simple. I mean, you could even say it of Nono, you know, when you think of El Gran Solo, of this Revolution Internationale and all that. I mean, he uses sometimes very simple tunes, but the structure remains very complicated. But at the heart of it, the material, as we would say, is you know, is the simple song. I love Schubert, so it's for me the greatest anyway. So Mahler, for me, is very connected with that. I mean, Mahler is much more detailed, much more refined, you could say. He uses finer material, you know. Bruckner uses. I mean, when I hear Bruckner, you know, I always think of stones and rocks and mountains and not so much churches, but, you know, nature, big statement. Mahler is nearer the human soul, I would say. We know I'm not so often in Austria, but when I go, when I'm in Austria and go up the mountains and I hear the diddle the bells, you know, I must always think of Mahler and the loneliness which you walk into when you go up the mountains. Because the other day I was walking here, very near Salzburg, on a very high mountain. I was completely alone. It was completely still, and there were just some sheep, and their bells were ringing. And I had to think of Mahler, of course, and Weber. Usually an orchestra has one dynamic, you know. They all play piano, they all play forte. But in Mahler's music, every single line has its individual dynamic. So it comes out, and you know, that's why I refer to this Jahrmarkt experience. I think that he wanted very much this relief of dynamics. I think that's something he was dreaming. So you suddenly hear this, is, you know, like a camera would zoom in and out into the orchestra. And this, I think, very often is not exaggerated enough. If you think how important it was for him to mark the dynamics in his score, to really, like, you know, pop-ups we say today in the internet culture, the pop-ups, you know, to read that, and that the winds really lift the instruments. I mean, apart from visually, that it has another directness in sound. All these effects. This is what I really like, and I think that's a big challenge to bring that out as a conductor. The music I really understand as part of my history, you know, it starts with Mahler. I would also like to understand the music before, but and I think I do, but I would say it's more history in the sense that I have no connection at all, you know, as a person, as through the experience of my life. Though with Mahler, I feel really that's the first composer I would say I feel very, very directly connected. And that's my point of reference. Also, of course, because as you said, from Mahler, with Mahler, the modern music starts. Actually, I would say. I think definitely. So everything comes out of him. I mean, he was first conductor who was interested in theater. This is something I really admire, and that's a tradition I strongly try to live after. You know, Mahler was the first one to work together with certain regisseurs and set designers, you know, and because he understood the importance of an music theater production. Unfortunately, that's a tradition which is still until today is not, has not come through altogether, because many conductors think, you know, they do their theater on stage, I do my music in the pit, which I think is a complete misunderstanding of opera. I think the most refined symphony is number 4, I think. Because it's kind of very, you know, there's no trombones and it's very light. And I always felt very near the 4th. It's the most lyrical of all, I find. It's like, you know, he took a step back before saying, I really think that the last movement of number 4 is a farewell. It's a kind of cradle song, you know, it's really, it vanishes into this low E in the end, in the harp, and it really, what do you say, walks away. I mean, it really, morendo, something is dying there, I feel very strongly. And then comes number 5, and I think, the big ones, you know, the big statements. But number 4 is very, very close to my heart, yes.